This initiative by the Board of Trustees of the Rotary Foundation encourages every Rotarian every year to participate in a foundation program that is making a difference in the world and to contribute to the foundation's annual fund to keep it at a sustainable level for the future. What maybe a lot of us don't know is that it is the foundation fund that we give to that comes back 2 to 3 years later with the money that we need to do projects. They're the people that give us the grants. And the money that we put in now comes back to us, I don't know if it's twofold or threefold, but the money that we receive from them is because of the money that is being donated every year on the part of the members. Today, nearly 1/3 of Rotarians participate in this initiative. In 2019-2020, the Rotary Foundation was able to award over 1,300 global grants for large-scale sustainable projects due to the generosity of these Rotarians. If you're part of the Every Rotarian Every Year initiative, I personally thank you for your support on behalf of the Rotary Foundation. Okay, the reason we're all here. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Carlos Leitão. He's a member of the National Assembly of Quebec for Robert Baldwin, and he represents the Quebec Liberal Party. He is also chair of the Committee on Public Administration. He is the official opposition critic for the economy and official opposition critic for the fight against climate change. During the term of the Couillard government, Quebec underwent quite a major restructuring of its public finances, and the architect of that fiscal reform was Carlos Leitão, who was the Minister of Finance at the time. He's a graduate of McGill University and a former vice president of La Banque Nationale. He's speaking to us today about the place of government in society amidst the current challenges that we're facing. And without further ado, sir, I will give you the floor.
Very good. Thank you very much. You can all hear me, I presume. So thank you very much for inviting me. Clearly, we are living in some unprecedented times. That's the least we can say. I really don't have a whole lot to say, but be aware of economists who say they don't have a whole lot to say because then they go on and never stop. But I'd like to have some time also for discussion, for questions you may have. I'd like to cover the role of the government, the role of the state in this post-pandemic world. But perhaps we should start by very quickly, just going over where we were in Quebec, in Canada, before COVID. So before March, the economies of Quebec and Canada were really very, very strong. I mean, we were living in Quebec, unprecedented times. We were at full employment. Our public finances were well organized, and when we collectively could face the future with a good degree of optimism and confidence. It really seemed as if anything and everything was possible. There were always challenges, there are always difficulties, but clearly, in Quebec, anyways, there are always inequalities and discrimination. But again, we believed we had the means to face those issues, and our biggest problem was just the lack of labor shortages. We were running out of people. So that was then. This is now. So what's happening? Of course, we had COVID, a huge public health crisis. Quebec and especially Montreal didn't do that well, and I think we have to say it. And it's not pointing fingers at anybody. It's just that we didn't see or couldn't see the fact that our long-term care centers for seniors were ill prepared, and it was a disaster. Clearly, it was a disaster. I mean, the level of deaths in in the Montreal area, in Quebec. I think there will be many inquiries into this, but that clearly was not one of our proudest moments. Of course, the pandemic also adds a big impact on the economy with everything shutting down. I think the government did on that front. They did what needed to be done, and we were able to bring things under control. Again, with the massive fail of long-term care facilities, but we were nevertheless able to recover from that. And here in my own writing, you mentioned Robert Baldwin. That's the cities of Dollard, Desormeaux, and Pierrefonds. And here in Dollard, we had at least a couple of CHSLD where it was just tragic, where dozens of people died, and the families were extremely anxious and worried. We tried to do what we could in relaying the information. It took some time, but then I believe that our public health authorities, by late April, so a month after, were finally able to start to get ahead of this thing. The army came in, and certainly that did help a lot. So that is that, and now we have to be. We all hope that we are now, of course, much better prepared for the coming second wave, because it is coming. So the economy shut down, and following that, there was then a period of a gradual reopening. Now the interesting thing here is that we put a lot of emphasis, or at least the government does, on the fact that as the economy reopens, jobs come back and all that. But we are very far from being back to normal. We're very far from anything resembling business as usual. Even though, I don't know, we've recovered something like 75% of all the jobs lost in Quebec, but this is clearly not business as usual. And I am of the view that the pandemic and the public health crisis will have permanent changes. It will affect, or it is affecting, the way we work, with the way we meet, as we see it here. The way we the way we share, the way we trade with each other, the way we face education, healthcare, everything, the way we learn. And this I think this consequences will be long lasting, perhaps permanent, but at least long lasting. So, what is the role of the state in all this? First of all, in the period of crisis, so the first few months, the government, generally speaking, in the OECD area, stepped in with massive intervention. Was the case in Canada, the hundreds of billions of dollars in deficits, which worry some people. We can talk about that if you will, and I do have my concerns. But clearly, that intervention saved the day. We avoided, a massive depression, economic depression, because that was going to happen. When you shut down the economy, the risk of a cascade of bankruptcies and permanent damage to the economy, that risk was very real. And the fact that the government intervened massively with huge income support programs, that kept most of us, not all, but that kept most of us afloat, and so allowed the economy to get over this emergency situation. Then by late spring, then we start reopening the economy, the jobs start to come back, but those programs are still there. The income support is still there, and it's still playing a very important role. And now I just refer you, if you want to today's decision by the Bank of Canada, which I think is very very interesting, where the Bank of Canada, of course, maintained its its very low interest rates, and continues to do its magic of quantitative easing. We can also talk about that if you will. But what is interesting is what the bank said, that there's a strong reopening and all that, and the jobs are coming back, and more or less according to plan, more or less. But then they say this phase will be followed by a protracted and uneven recuperation phase, which will still be heavily reliant on policy support. So what is coming after this stabilization and reopening phase is now a recovery phase that will be uneven, that will be, I think, arduous, and that will cause significant problems, economic problems, social problems, especially in the very large urban areas. So Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, the big cities, the big metropolitan areas are the ones that are this time around really hit very hard by this public health crisis and economic recession that followed. And so this requires, of course, a strong government intervention, but not just strong government intervention, but I think enlightened government intervention. So what should governments do? What could governments do? I think the first thing to recognize that however massive government support has been, it cannot continue at that pace, much beyond, I think, this fall. Come 2021, I think government support, government intervention will still be required, and I think welcome, but it needs to be more focused. It needs to be better designed. And what do I mean by that? Two things. I think that on the one hand, we also are facing a significant challenge in terms of environmental adaptation, changes to climate change, which requires strong policy action. So there's that. And then there's the fact that even though the labor market is recovering and all that, jobs are coming back, but there's a few big sectors that still employ hundreds of thousands of people across Canada, tens of thousands of Quebecers. Those sectors are probably not going to come back. And by that, I mean what we call the personal services sectors. I don't want to stereotype anybody, but hairdressers and so that type of personal services, that's going to be a challenge. Retail trade, which again still employs lots of people. Retail trade, which was already changing, that change is now accelerated, and that too we'll have a lot of jobs that will be lost permanently. And then the other one is the tourism, the food and shelter business, so tourism, restaurants, bars, etc., hotels. And so again, that too has a big impact on the large metropolitan areas. And again, those people, those jobs that will be lost there, I think will be lost permanently. So coming back then to public policy, so how do we address this? And again, this is new, because typically in typical recessions, however difficult they were, whether it's 2007, 2008, the late 1990s, for those who remember, 1981 was a very tough recession. Typically, those standard recessions, you would have a massive hit to manufacturing activity and to trade. So exports would collapse, and then so the export-oriented sectors would decline. But we could always count on domestic demand. We could always count on precisely those sectors that are now in big trouble to bring the economy out. Construction, residential construction, and domestic demand fed by those sometimes public injections of money, but then all that sector, food, recreation, tourism, all of that would recover and pull the economy back up. Well, those sectors now, this time around, are not there to participate in the recovery, and they will actually hold the economy down again, namely in the big cities. So this is going to create a big challenge, because as I said at the start, in Canada, in Quebec, our level of income inequality is much lower than that in the United States, for example, and we had put in place I think reasonable social programs that assisted in all that, but now you're going to find a very large increase in the number of people needing public assistance. We haven't seen that yet because of the the federal programs, the $2,000 a month, and all the other federal assistance programs, the banks, postponing interest payments, mortgage payments. So all that has been kind of pushed back. Even the governments, in also postponing tax payments, income tax, and other types of taxes. So all that is kind of pushing things to later on, but later on will come, and that will be quite a problem, because some sectors are doing well, but you're not going to be able to recycle, say, an unemployed restaurant server into a construction worker, or if that happens, it will take some time. So the role of government in this situation, in my view, is several things. One is retraining, so to find ways to allow people to acquire new skills, and so that's a role that government usually takes, but the record is a little not very good. I think they can do better, and I think they will have to do better as we move into retraining people to occupy different jobs, and so this will require not just the technical abilities, but also means to support the families as the workers acquire new skills. So that will need to be done. Also programs to provide some assistance to businesses that may reopen, that are facing temporary difficulties. This temporary could still be a long time, and in the meantime, if we could assist them in covering their fixed costs, whether it's rents or other types of fixed costs. And it really is, as I said before, this affects the large metropolitan areas more than other cities. It's also, I think, a fight to preserve the hearts of our communities. In French we say les commerces de proximité, so the close businesses, Main Street. If we are to avoid a series of shops that will be shut down, and a lot of streets, main streets that become kind of ghost towns, and that our cities start to resemble some of the US cities that were badly hit by 2008-2009 crisis. So this will require strong government intervention. The federal and provincial governments have a role to play, and again, so there's the training part and all that, the labor training, and the other big area, I think, where state intervention is required now is in assisting the cities, assisting the big cities, but all cities, but particularly the big cities, and particularly Montreal. Montreal needs help, and Montreal is the hearts of the Quebec economy and cultural life and everything. and Montreal is in trouble. Montreal is in financial trouble, and Montreal is facing some really challenging times, and they need government assistance to be able to overcome this crisis, which is unprecedented. The city really faces a huge financial hole, and there's a huge task ahead of itself in trying to revive city life. So that's going to be so another area where government intervention, where government assistance will be required. We talk a lot, and I think yesterday or this morning there were some announcements about what to do about downtown Montreal, and it is very important because if Montreal is the heart of Quebec, then downtown is the heart of Montreal, and we can't let that go. So we need to find ways to assist and to help Montreal. The relationship between the provincial government and the municipal government, having been there in the past, let's face it, it's a very paternalistic relationship. We, the government, we, the provincial government, we are the senior government, and you people at the city level, you make sure that the garbage is collected, and that's just, I'm exaggerating obviously, but this relationship has not been really a very constructive one, and I think it is still problematic, and so we as elected officials, we have to find a way to improve the relationship and the communications between the provincial government, the federal government, and the city government. Typically, the provincial governments are a little cautious when they hear the feds come in and wanting to do all kinds of things. Whoa. Cities are our responsibility. Well, then do something about it. So then the other area of post-COVID state government action that is required is on the municipal front, and that is going to consume a lot of energy and a lot of resources, both human resources and financial resources. So that's important as well. The third area where government intervention is needed, and again has to be done perhaps in a better way, is that we are going to face, if we are not already facing, a problem of rising poverty, rising inequality. A lot of those jobs that were lost during the pandemic, mostly in the big cities, typically those were low-wage jobs, low-income jobs, but that were, of course, crucial for the well-being of the people that were working in those areas. And as those jobs disappear, and as government direct support diminishes, that's going to create huge amount of social problems, again, of rising inequality. Some things that we have been able to avoid in Quebec, in Canada, especially as we look south to the United States. And again, I'm not saying that that's going to happen here as well, but one shouldn't be naive either, and one should realize that there are now going to be some significant issues with poverty and the rising income inequality. It just also so happens, coincidence, that a lot of those folks that are being displaced by the pandemic and its economic consequences are people of different races, are recent immigrants and not so recent immigrants. So that too is going to increase tensions, social and cultural tensions in our large urban areas, in our large cities, in Montreal, in our case. So again, government has a role to play there. And we're not here to play politics, but I think that part of the job to me appears to be still a little bit of an area that the current government is perhaps not fully appreciative of what lies ahead. So they have to. I think they have to pay more attention to that. Luckily, we have in Quebec a series of institutional arrangements that have developed through the ages that can assist in this process. We have something that looks like kind of a guaranteed minimum income. Our crédit d'impôt solidarité. I think we could build on that to make sure that we create a really effective income support program. So that's the third area in which government intervention is going to be required, and it has to be done intelligently, if you will, or looking forward to the new challenges. The last area I would like to raise with you, and then I'll stop and take some questions if there are, is the issue of climate change. And the pandemic at the same time was a big early warning signal that things can get things can spiral out of control very quickly. And climate change is one of those areas. We have given ourselves in Quebec a target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 37.5% by 2030 from 1990 levels. Now, two things with this. One, it sounds a little abstract. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 37.5%. Well, what does that mean, really? And then 2030, well, that's far away. Well, first, 2030 is not that far away. It's 10 years from now. And this thing is not going to happen all by itself. We collectively need to put in place measures that will force our economy to decarbonize and so to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this will require government intervention, obviously, government measures, government programs, but the kinds, in my opinion, the kinds of investments that will be required to make this transition to a low carbon economy, the amounts in question are mind-boggling. No government on earth has the ability to do that by itself, and therefore, to me, the trick to be able to get to where we want to get to a more a lower carbon economy is to mobilize private sector resources, private investment. To do that, to be able to mobilize private investment and private companies to embark in this process of transformation, the incentives need to be in place. The proper incentives need to be in place. What does that mean? Well, it means that we have to put a price on pollution. If emitting greenhouse gases continues to be free of charge, then businesses will continue to do that. But if it starts to cost them and increasingly more, then there will be a change. I still believe that the price system, so the market-based economy, is still the best vehicle to arrive at those outcomes. But the incentives have to be in place, and those incentives, a price on carbon, taxes, and other things like that, or direct regulations. I mean, those things are not necessarily very politically popular. So it requires political courage to do that. And then you'll ask me, well, you were there from 2014, 2018. Why didn't you do it? And I would say, well, that's a very good question. And we tried, and indeed, there's quite a bit of pushback. The public, everybody wants to, a cleaner planet, and everybody wants to reduce, greenhouse gas emissions, as long as it doesn't cost us too much. and transportation being one of the major components to greenhouse gas emissions, inevitably, that the only way to achieve that is to have an impact on transportation, cars, gasoline, you name it, all kinds of things. So, and again, the politics of that are a little complicated, to say the least. However, 2020 is different from 2015. 5 years later, I think there's a greater awareness and a greater understanding in the population at large of the severity of the issue and of the need to act, and that 2030, it's not that far away. So I think the time is now. Also, the time is appropriate to move along the lines of eco-fiscal measures, eco-conditionality, meaning that a lot of the government assistance, a lot of the government support to business sectors, for example, could be based on certain number of conditions, and environmental conditions would be some of those. So again, this is not an easy thing to do, but that's an area again where government intervention has to be more active now than before. So labor training, manpower training, or it's also action on the labor market. It's one area of government intervention. On social policy and then the reduction in inequalities, especially in the large urban areas, with a view of reducing poverty that is creeping up. So that's another area, another important area. More enlightened policies regarding the relationship between the federal, provincial governments and the cities. In our case, Montreal is also a third important area. And then the fourth and final, and perhaps, in my opinion, one of the most important ones, is also a more active government policy on carbon transition, or on getting us to a lower carbon economy. So I would stop here because I could go on forever, and that's not the purpose, I think, of this meeting. If there are issues you would like to discuss with me, I'm of course open to engage in a dialogue. If you need time to digest all this, that's fine too. So I just leave it to the organizers to move on to the next step. Thank you.
Carlos, I'll start it off for everybody.
Okay.
Given the fact that we've got a second wave coming, and supposing that well, we don't have the vaccine yet, obviously. We're coming into the winter season, and the second wave could possibly be much worse than the first. At what point does the government say, let's say in the case of the federal government, well, we don't have another $200 billion to throw at this. Maybe it's time to just let it go and go for the herd immunity. Well, at what point? It's a huge question for them, I know, but at what point do they say the money we can't spend anymore?
Well, again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand all the science around this. But it appears to me that the concept of herd immunity is perhaps distant. I don't think we'll get to that. I think the cost of that, the human cost of that, would be just too high. That's what I think. Governments are, however, counting on the availability of a vaccine at some point. Now, this vaccine could be ready in 6 months. It's not going to be ready in 2 months to save Mr. Trump. No, but it could be ready in 6 months, or it could be ready in a year. So a vaccine is coming. It's a matter of time, but you're right. This time could be another year or so. And in the case of a second wave, then what do we do? In that case, if that does happen, and if governments, for public health reasons, are forced once again to reconfine everybody, which they don't want to do, but they may have to go there. I think in that case, well, it will be another 200 billion, it will be another 200 billion. I mean, the cost of not doing that, the cost of not helping people until a vaccine is ready, and then we can more easily reopen the economy on a permanent basis. The cost of not doing that would be huge. So the government would consider those emergency programs. Now, is there a limit? I mean, 200 billion, 500 billion, I mean, the numbers become abstract. It's just mind-boggling. The fact that, I mean, there are limits, but at the same time, in a crisis like this, I think Canada still has, we're still far from that limit, because we still have a central bank that is functioning well, and so that funding for an eventual new massive program of income assistance, the funding would come from the central bank. Another 200, 300, 400 billion. It can be done, and it would place Canada, of course, in a difficult position in terms of public debt, but it would still be manageable. I think the problem then is once we are over the emergency period, so once we have a vaccine that is effective, and so once the economy can start functioning on a more normal basis, even though, as I said before, I don't think we'll go back to normality, then at that point, then the government of the day will have to put in place a credible program, a credible platform to address the debt issue. And that could take how many years it will take to whittle down the debt. But I think
do what you have
in the face of a second wave, the government would go.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to step in?
I have a question about poverty in Montreal.
Yes.
One thing that was not mentioned was the increase in people aging here.
Mm-hmm.
In a recovery, the number of people that will be of age to go back to work, to be retrained, will be reduced, because the number of people who are aging is a large number, and the fact that these people will also be added to those people who will be added to those numbers of poverty, going into poverty. How will that be addressed?
Yes, well, that is indeed a major issue, and our demographic challenge. So, rapidly aging population is something that has already been analyzed extensively, and will continue to be so. A couple of things on that. One is that, and it's inevitable, and I think it has to be talked, discussed. It's the issue of immigration. With our aging population, rapidly aging population, one of the ways, and it's not the only one, but one of the ways of minimizing the challenges of the aging population and the declining labor force, one of the ways to address that is immigration. Now, we've had lots of discussion in Quebec about immigration since 2018. There appears to be very little public appetite to increase the levels of immigration anytime soon. I think that's unfortunate, but we cannot, in my opinion, we cannot fully address the aging demographics without considering immigration. So that's one thing. The other thing is that even though we are aging rapidly, and we are as a society, there are still a number of things we can do to increase what economists call the labor force participation rate of people over the age of 60. I'm one of those. When we look at Quebec and compare it to the other Canadian provinces, or even to the United States, but say compare it to Ontario and the other provinces, our participation rates of the 60 plus category is significantly lower than in the other provinces. Meaning that people in Quebec, the 60 plus category, have had a tendency to retire and stay retired. Is that a choice? Is that a conscious choice? Is whatever the reason is, the fact is that there is a difference. So again, through government policies, either tax policies or other means, I think we can make some gains, and we can keep folks like myself in the labor market for a few more years. Like, we don't all need to retire at 60. We compared to our parents' generation, I think we are all more active and healthier than our parents were. So I think we could work. Again, I'm not saying that we should force everybody to work until they're 85. It's not that I'm saying, but there's a large pool of people there, over the age of 60 that have pulled back, have retired, have pulled back from the labor market, and they could still participate. And I think we would all have a lot to gain collectively if more of those folks would stay in the labor market. So more immigration, a higher labor force participation rate of the 60 plus group. But besides that, there are not that many other ways of, we can have a lot more clones and robots. that can go some way, but it won't.
That doesn't really answer the poverty question, though, about the elderly. And particularly elderly single women.
Yes.
Really a poverty question.
Yeah. For that, I think yes, you're right. That's a significant issue. But on that front, I think in Canada and in Quebec, we have the infrastructure to be able to address that. What do I mean by this? I mean that we do have a system of transfers, old age pension, for example. In the case of Quebec, the CIS, the Crédit d'Impôt Solidarité. So we do have the basic infrastructure in terms of programs of redistribution that can address that. So if we realize that older Canadians, older Quebecers are falling back into poverty, I think there's always the way to address that would be to increase those transfers. And again, that will be a societal discussion on how that will be done. Public funds are not there are limits, but I think that there's something we can do. I mean, old age pension, OAS, old age security, is a program that was very good when it was created many decades ago, and I think we should revise that, and we should bring those rates. So there's a way to address that, and the way to address that is by improving existing programs, existing transfer programs. And the other way to address that also is to rethink the way we treat our elderly. And again, in the case of Quebec in particular, again, for whatever reason, and we can have big discussions about this, that there has been this trend, this way of institutionalizing our seniors, sending them into CHSLD and other residences. There's something to be said about keeping people in their own homes as long as possible. That's a question of money, but it's more than just money. It's the way we think, the way we support, the way we collectively support everybody. A lot of seniors are alone. They suffer greatly from loneliness. And you can increase the transfers all you want, give them more money. If they remain alone and isolated, they're not necessarily, well, they're not going to have a better life either. So we also have to think more broadly than just income transfers, although the income transfer is also important.
Mr. Leitão, one of our guests has posted this question. May I ask, if you could predict the future, who would you see to be the next president of the USA this November? and there's more. How would you say that would affect the Canadian economy and the environment?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Remembering that we're an apolitical group here.
Of course. And that, yeah. So how am I going to say this? Well, I'll be very, very clear. I would hope that Mr. Biden wins. Let's put it that way. But whoever wins, I think the big risk now, and that's how that affects our economy here. The big risk is that this election in the United States is looking to be very, very divisive. And regardless of who wins, I don't know if they will, I hope that they will be able to come back together on January 1st, 2021. And there's a big risk that the rifts that we see now in the US that are widening, and that we will have a very contested election. That is true. We may like or dislike Mr. Trump, and I don't particularly like him very much. But he's also, he does have a very strong machine behind him, and so one shouldn't dismiss, oh, he's going to lose. No. His base is very solid, and so this election will be close. And I think the big risk is that there will be no clear winner, and that the divisions will remain, and that the loser will not necessarily accept the result of the election. And that will create bigger divisions and bigger instability, and that will be a huge problem for us, because Canada, particularly Quebec and Ontario, our biggest trading partner is the United States. I mean, they are our neighbors. They are our partners in our neighbors, and if our neighbors fall into a spiral, of social distancing, and that can be terrible for us. So I don't want to be, don't want to be too alarmist. But what is going on in the United States at this moment is very distressing, because the divisions there appear to be irreconcilable. And that, that's very sad, and it's very dangerous. And they're our neighbors. I mean, they will always be neighbors, and you don't necessarily want to have a neighbor that is in the middle of a constant strife. So that's a big problem.
I have another question here, Mr. Leitão, from it's just come in on the chat. Do you believe that there are merits to implementing a universal basic income?
There are merits, but I'm not particularly, how should I put this?
Another easy one.
I think the best social, the best income program ever is a good job. So having said that, and keeping in mind what I said before, of a lot of people losing their jobs and perhaps not being able to return to the labor market, or at least not right away, mainly in the large cities, in all of those sectors that I said are hit very hard by the current crisis. So what do we do? Guaranteed the minimum income is one way of addressing that. In Canada, our problem, which is at the same time is a strength, is that we already have several guaranteed income programs. We talked just before. We talked about OAS, old age security. That's a type of guaranteed income for seniors. We on the other end of the spectrum, we have a family allowance program. So that's guaranteed income for families with young children. And so we have several of these programs already in place. The idea behind the guaranteed minimum income is that you collapse all of that into one program. So there's one government program, and that's that. Theoretically, it makes a lot of sense, and theoretically, it's wonderful. The problem that I have is how do you go from here to there? How do we go from a situation where we have 5, 6, 7 different programs, federal, provincial, some municipal, and how do you put all that together into one transfer program, one guaranteed income program? And that nobody has yet been able to do that. There have been some pilot projects in Finland and in other countries in Europe, and the results have always been, mixed. So it's an idea that I think has a lot of value, it's very interesting, and intellectually it's very attractive. The devil is in the details. It's how do you implement it, because it can only work again if you collapse all programs into one, and it's that execution that is difficult. Now, because it's difficult doesn't mean that one shouldn't try to do it, but I'm just saying that there will be a lot of implementation issues, and perhaps a period of crisis as we now are in the midst of a crisis, perhaps that's not the best time to move towards something like that. But again, it's when we looked at that when we were in government. We in fact put in place a big structural reform of social welfare programs in Quebec, and we wanted to go further. But every time we wanted to go further, we were always faced with this problem of implementing, of collapsing different programs into just one. It would be ideal, but I think very difficult to achieve. I would put it that way.
I know we're going over our time here, but I really don't care, because we have questions piling up here. So we're going to continue. The next question we see here is, in what areas do you think the economy in Montreal, specifically in Quebec generally, will grow and or change in the next 10, 15, or 20 years as a result of COVID?
Well, if I knew that, I would be a very rich man. I would buy stock in those companies. I don't know. And I think nobody really knows. But what we know is that the pace of change